The students of Galactic Medical Academy fidgeted nervously in their seats as Professor Zathrax activated the holographic display. The professor's skin shifted from its usual calm blue to an excited purple as all 6 tentacles tapped rhythmically against the podium. "Today marks a historic moment," Zathrax announced, 4 of their 6 eyes blinking with barely contained excitement. "We welcome the first human from Earth to our prestigious institution." A collective gasp rippled through the lecture hall. Several students instinctively pulled their environmental protection fields tighter around their delicate forms. Earth, classified as a death world due to its extreme conditions, was the stuff of horror stories for most galactic citizens. "I remind you all," Professor Zathrax continued, "that Earth evolved with over 30,000 species of predators, extreme temperature fluctuations, and atmospheric conditions that would be lethal to most of you. Humans have adapted to survive these conditions without technological assistance." The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Lieutenant Sarah Chen strode in with the confident gait of someone accustomed to higher gravity. Her skin bore several visible scars, and her muscular frame towered over most of the delicate alien students. Several Flotian students, whose gossamer bodies evolved in minimal gravity, drifted higher in their anti-grav fields, as if seeking safety from the newcomer. "Thank you for having me," Sarah said with a smile that revealed alarmingly sharp canine teeth. "I'm honored to represent Earth in this exchange." Zathrax extended a welcoming tentacle, which Sarah shook firmly. "Lieutenant Chen has served as a combat medic in Earth's Unified Defense Forces and brings valuable field experience in emergency medicine." A timid Flotian student raised a translucent appendage. "Excuse me, human, but what is that mark across your arm? Is it some form of identification?" Sarah glanced at the jagged scar running from her wrist to elbow. "This shrapnel wound from a firefight in the Amazon conflict. Lost about 30% of my blood volume before I could treat it myself." The classroom went utterly silent. Several students edged away from her. "You survived losing that much circulatory fluid?" asked a Marillion student, their crystalline exoskeleton clicking nervously. "Just another Tuesday on Earth," Sarah chuckled, causing several more students to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Professor Zathrax quickly intervened. "Humans possess remarkable regenerative capabilities, including rapid blood production and tissue repair. Their medical practices reflect these biological advantages." Threxel, a brilliant Vexillian whose translucent skin revealed 3 throbbing hearts, raised their voice from the back row. "Professor, with respect, I question the value of primitive field techniques in our advanced medical program. We have nano-regenerators and quantum cellular stabilizers. What could we possibly learn from improvisation?" Sarah met the alien's gaze without offense. "When your stabilizers fail and your regenerators run out of power, what will you do then?" "Such scenarios are statistically improbable," Threxel countered. "On Earth, we call improbable scenarios Tuesday afternoon," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "Everything fails eventually. Humans specialize in what happens next." Professor Zathrax's skin rippled with scholarly excitement. "And that, students, is precisely why Lieutenant Chen is joining us. The exchange program aims to integrate different approaches to medicine. The Galactic Council believes that humanity's unique perspective, particularly their adaptability in crisis situations, may provide valuable insights." As Sarah took her assigned seat, she noted the mixture of curiosity and apprehension on the alien faces surrounding her. Some regarded her as a dangerous curiosity, others with academic interest. Professor Zathrax watched the human with fascination, wondering if bringing this predatory species into their peaceful academy was brilliant or catastrophic. Either way, medical education in the galaxy would never be the same. "The patient presents with a severed arterial connection," Professor Zathrax announced during the emergency medicine lecture. A holographic alien writhed in simulated agony, fluorescent green fluid pulsing from a wounded limb. "Your response?" A Marillion student raised a crystalline appendage. "Activate nanostabilizers to create a molecular field around the wound site, then apply quantum tissue regenerators to rebuild the arterial structure at the cellular level. Excellent. Professor Zathrax nodded. And if the patient shows signs of fluid shock, administer a precision mixed hemoreplicator appropriate to their species, answered another student. The standard procedure requires a sterile environment and at least 2 medical specialists. Sarah listened silently, noting how each answer reflected societies where medical emergencies happened in controlled environments with abundant resources. When her turn came, she stood and approached the simulation controls. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the equipment. Professor Zathrax's skin rippled with curiosity. "Please proceed, Lieutenant." Sarah reprogrammed the scenario. The sterile medical bay disappeared, replaced by a rocky landscape bathed in the red light of an unfamiliar sun. Debris scattered across the ground, and the patient lay sprawled beside a crashed shuttle. On Earth, we often treat patients where no medical facilities exist for hundreds of kilometers, she explained. The class watched as Sarah's holographic counterpart assessed the situation with methodical speed. She created a tourniquet from a belt, elevating the wounded limb. Next, she improvised a pressure bandage using clothing and sealed the wound with a substance from her field kit. "Is that some form of an advanced human technology?" asked a fascinated student. "No," Sarah replied. "It's a commercial adhesive similar to what you might use to repair equipment. In field medicine, we repurpose ordinary items constantly." The simulation continued, showing how humans could survive catastrophic blood loss that would mean instant death for most species. Sarah demonstrated techniques for maintaining body temperature during shock, creating emergency airways using pocket tools, and stabilizing fractures with materials scavenged from the crash site. "This approach assumes no help is coming," she explained. Earth's medical philosophy developed in environments where survival often depended solely on what you carried and what you could find. Frexel rose from their seat, their translucent skin flushing with agitation patterns. "This is barbaric. You're describing torture, not medicine." Several students murmured in agreement, their appendages moving in gestures of distress. "By galactic standards, perhaps," Sarah acknowledged calmly. "But when faced with death, humans become remarkably creative. Our first medical techniques developed on battlefields, not in laboratories." Professor Zathrax intervened before the discussion could escalate. "Consider, students, that evolution shapes both biology and methodology. Human medicine reflects their unique evolutionary pressures." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. Most of your species evolved in environments with fewer predators and more stable conditions. Your medical techniques reflect that history, precise, sophisticated, and optimized for controlled settings." She displayed a timeline of Earth's medical history, crude surgeries performed during warfare, improvised treatments during natural disasters, innovations born from necessity in resource-limited regions. "Humans had to develop methods that worked under adverse conditions," she continued. "We built redundancies into our procedures because we assume something will go wrong." The tension in the room crackled like static electricity as 2 fundamentally different approaches to preserving life clashed for the first time. "But surely," a tentacled student objected, "your civilization has developed beyond such primitive measures." "Our advanced medical centers rival anything in the galaxy," Sarah confirmed. "But every human medical student still learns these basic techniques because technology is not infallible. When systems fail, we fall back on fundamentals." Professor Zathrax's appendages rippled with academic excitement. This contrast represents precisely why this exchange program exists. Different evolutionary paths create different problem-solving approaches. The professor turned to the class. "Tomorrow, we move from theory to practice. Prepare for emergency simulation exercises, where both methodologies will be tested." The alien students exchanged nervous glances. Theory was one thing. Watching human emergency medicine in practice would be something else entirely. Red emergency lights bathed the simulation chamber in an eerie glow. What had begun as a routine training exercise spiraled into genuine danger when the Academy's pride, a state-of-the-art holographic medical simulator, malfunctioned spectacularly. System overload detected, announced the artificial intelligence managing the simulation. Safety protocols disengaging. Before Professor Zathrax could abort the program, a surge of energy caused structural damage to the chamber itself. The ceiling panels buckled, and support beams groaned under sudden stress. "Everyone out," ordered the professor, skin shifting to emergency orange. Evacuation protocol alpha. Students scattered toward the exits, their training forgotten in the face of real danger. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber as a support beam gave way, plummeting toward the fleeing group. Lyra, a Marillion exchange student, couldn't move fast enough. Her crystalline exoskeleton, evolved for precise movement rather than speed, shattered on impact as the beam struck her squarely. Pearlescent fluid, the Marillion equivalent of blood, began pooling beneath her delicate form. The sight of actual injury sent most students into shock. Their species had lived in such protected environments for millennia that genuine trauma appeared almost obscene to them. "Stabilize the rest of the structure," Sarah commanded, already moving toward the injured student. 2 engineering students quickly diverted power to the remaining support fields, preventing further collapse. "The emergency systems are offline," Professor Zathrax announced, voice trembling as they bent over Lyra's broken form. "Medical staff are responding from the main facility, but arrival time exceeds 15 minutes. The professor's color shifted to deep purple, the hue of despair. "Marillions cannot survive arterial rupture beyond 12 minutes. Sarah knelt beside the injured student, already removing her regulation jacket. "Then we have work to do," she said, her combat medic training kicking in. The Deathworlder's eyes narrowed with predatory focus, making several students back away instinctively. "I need volunteers with steady hands," she called, voice cutting through the panic. "The rest of you, clear the area." Threxel, surprisingly, stepped forward. "I have 3 manipulator appendages. Will that help?" "Perfect," Sarah nodded. "Apply pressure exactly where I show you." She guided their trembling tentacles to a specific point where the pearlescent fluid pulsed most strongly. Lyra's breathing grew shallow, her crystalline features clouding as death approached. The Myrillion's complex respiratory system, visible through translucent tissues, began to flicker erratically. "The main crystal lattice is fracturing," Professor Zathrax observed grimly. "Her life matrix is destabilizing." Sarah worked with swift efficiency, tearing fabric from her uniform to create an improvised pressure seal. When she reached into her boot and pulled out a small metal tool, several students gasped. "That's a weapon," Professor Zathrax exclaimed in horror. "It's a multi-tool," Sarah corrected without looking up. "And right now, it's the difference between life and death." Using the tool's various attachments, Sarah fashioned a temporary support structure for Lyra's fractured exoskeleton. She combined components from the emergency kit with materials scavenged from the simulation equipment, creating a stabilizing matrix that slowed the pearlescent fluid loss. "Her life signs are stabilizing," Professor Zathrax noted with surprise, watching the Myrillion's bio-readings on a portable scanner. "We're not out of danger yet," Sarah cautioned, working to seal a major rupture in Lyra's arterial system. "I need something to cauterize this breach." When she described her plan to use a controlled chemical reaction to seal the wound, half the class retreated to the far side of the room. "This will harm her," Threxel protested, their skin now pulsing with stress patterns. "Yes," Sarah acknowledged grimly, "but she'll be alive to feel it." As the emergency medical team finally arrived at the 11-minute mark, they found the human hunched over the Marillion, performing procedures nowhere in the Academy's medical protocols, and the patient, against all probability, still alive. "Hold this exactly as I show you," Sarah instructed Threxel, guiding their trembling appendages to apply pressure at a specific junction point on Lyra's shattered form. The Myrillion's breathing grew increasingly shallow, crystalline features clouding as death approached. The emergency medical team had arrived, but found their equipment incompatible with the damaged power systems in the simulation chamber. They could only watch as the human continued her unconventional treatment. Sarah transformed before their eyes into something both terrifying and magnificent. Gone was the polite exchange student, replaced by a focused predator fighting against death itself. She moved with decisive speed, fashioning a pressure seal from her uniform fabric and components scavenged from the simulation equipment. Her mineral-based circulatory system is failing, warned one of the medical team. Standard regeneration protocols require a sterile environment and specialized. We don't have time for standard anything. Sarah interrupted. She examined the pearlescent fluid still seeping from Lyra's wounds. This fluid carries both nutrients and crystallization agents, correct? Professor Zathrax nodded. Yes, but without proper filtration. Sarah was already combining chemicals from 3 different emergency kits, mixing them in ways their manufacturers never intended. On Earth, we have a saying, perfect is the enemy of good enough. We're not aiming for perfect recovery right now. We're aiming for survival. When she announced her intent to cauterize one of the wounds using a controlled chemical reaction, half the medical team retreated to a safe distance. This will cause microfractures in her tertiary lattice, objected the senior medical officer. Better microfractures than death, Sarah replied, carefully applying the mixture. The wound sizzled and sealed, stopping the critical fluid loss. Lyra's form shuddered, but her vital signs stabilized slightly. Remarkable, whispered Professor Zathrax. Unorthodox, but effective. Sarah worked methodically, explaining each technique as she went. Knowledge passed down from countless human battlefields where survival often depended on brutal but effective solutions. In trauma medicine, she explained while fashioning a splint from simulation equipment, we follow a hierarchy of priorities. Circulation first, then respiration, then everything else. We aim for survival first, comfort second, and aesthetics last. This hierarchy, so obvious to a human, represented a revolutionary concept to species whose medical philosophy developed in environments of abundance and safety. But the pain, objected one of the medical staff. Marillions have hypersensitive nerve clusters. Your methods will cause significant trauma. Pain means she's alive to feel it, Sarah responded. Recovery protocols can address trauma once survival is ensured. Using techniques that would be considered primitive by galactic standards, Sarah stabilized Lyra's condition enough for transfer to the medical center. As specialized equipment finally came online, the conventional treatments could begin. But everyone in the room knew that without the human's intervention, there would have been nothing left to save. As Lyra was carefully moved to a transport stretcher, Sarah finally relaxed her intense focus. She noticed the stunned expressions around her. Is there a problem? She asked, wiping pearlescent fluid from her hands. You used a cutting tool on a living being, said one horrified student. You applied chemical cauterization without neural blockers. You repurposed medical supplies for functions outside safety protocols. And the patient is still alive, Sarah pointed out quietly. Professor Zathrax's color had shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. You've given us much to consider, Lieutenant. Your methods violate 17 different medical protocols. With respect, Professor, Sarah replied, watching as Lyra was carefully moved toward the medical center. When systems fail, protocols become suggestions. Humans learned that lesson through millennia of hard experience. As the group dispersed, Threxel lingered behind. I still find your methods disturbing, they admitted, but they were effective. Sarah smiled slightly. That's the highest compliment a Deathworlder could ask for. The Academy's conference room buzzed with heated debate 3 days after the accident. Lyra sat among them, her crystalline form patched with temporary grafts that glittered under the lights, wounded but very much alive. Whenever a speaker became particularly agitated about Sarah's methods, the Marillion would pointedly tap her partially healed exoskeleton. The human employed techniques that violate 17 different medical protocols, argued Administrator Velix, waving a holographic rulebook with 4 appendages simultaneously. Such methods would never receive approval under standard review. And yet, Professor Zathrax countered, those same methods saved a life when our approved protocols would have failed. The professor activated a display showing Lyra's vital signs during the incident. Note the stabilization point, exactly 3.2 minutes after the human intervention began. Sarah stood before the gathering, now wearing the formal uniform of an Earth medical officer rather than her casual academy attire. She had prepared a presentation overnight, understanding that the theoretical foundation of her actions needed explanation more than the actions themselves. Respectfully, she began, "This isn't about protocols, it's about biology." She activated her own display, showing comparative anatomical scans. Humans evolved with redundant systems and an exceptional ability to survive trauma. The display shifted to show human medical history, from ancient battlefield amputations to modern emergency medicine. The alien audience watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Please observe this historical human patient," Sarah continued, displaying images of a construction worker who had survived a metal rod piercing his skull. Despite major brain trauma, he survived and retained most cognitive functions. Gasps echoed through the room. For most galactic species, any breach of the central nervous system meant certain death. Humans can lose significant blood volume, suffer organ damage, and still recover, Sarah explained. "We evolved alongside countless pathogens and predators, forcing our medical science to develop flexible approaches rather than perfect ones." She displayed Earth's evolutionary history, showing the constant threats that shaped human physiology. Our bodies expect damage and are built to survive it. This fundamentally shapes our approach to medicine. The concept of triage, prioritizing patients based on survival probability when resources are limited, provoked particular shock. "You choose who lives," asked a horrified student from a hive mind species. "Sometimes," Sarah acknowledged solemnly, "we choose who has the best chance because we cannot save everyone. That's the reality of medicine on a death world." Lyra raised a crystalline appendage. "I have reviewed the medical data from my treatment. The human's methods, while causing moderate secondary trauma, produced a 94% improvement in survival probability. My species' traditional treatments assume conditions that were not present during the emergency." Professor Zathrax's skin rippled with a pattern indicating deep thought. Perhaps our medical philosophy developed along different evolutionary paths for good reason. Species from stable environments developed precision techniques optimized for controlled conditions. Those from volatile environments developed adaptable techniques for unpredictable scenarios. "Precisely," Sarah agreed. "Neither approach is inherently superior. They serve different needs." Threxel, who had remained quiet throughout the session, finally spoke. "I have accessed Earth's medical databases since the incident. Human emergency medicine developed largely through warfare, condition where standard equipment and stable environments could not be guaranteed." Their skin rippled with the blue pattern indicating intellectual curiosity rather than their usual academic dismissal. What we initially perceived as primitive brutality was actually necessary adaptation. Sarah nodded, offering a slight smile. "Many human medical advances came from battlefields and disasters. We learned to work with what we had because waiting for ideal conditions meant death." As understanding dawned across alien faces, the discussion transformed from a disciplinary hearing into a fascinating exploration of comparative telemedicine. For many in the room, it was the first time they truly comprehended how profoundly biology and evolution shaped not just physiology, but an entire civilization's approach to preserving life. Perhaps, Professor Zathrax suggested as the session concluded, there are lessons we can learn from each other's approaches. Sarah struggled to control her trembling hands as she attempted the delicate procedure. Under Professor Zathrax's patient guidance, she tried again to manipulate the microscopic neural connector. A standard technique for most alien medical students, but extraordinarily difficult for human fingers evolved for strength over precision. "Almost," encouraged the professor as Sarah finally completed the connection. Your species' motor control is improving remarkably fast. Sarah exhaled slowly, flexing her fingers to relieve the cramping. If our roles were reversed, you'd be mastering sledgehammers by now. Across the academy, equally fascinating scenes unfolded as alien students crowded Sarah's newly established workshop. Emergency medicine with limited resources. What had begun as a required remedial course, following the simulation incident, had transformed into the semester's most popular elective. The environment will always find ways to kill you that you haven't prepared for, Sarah lectured, surveying the attentive faces. So we must learn to use whatever tools are available. She demonstrated creating emergency airway passages using writing implements, extracting venom using pressure differentials, and stabilizing fractured bones with everyday materials. But how do you determine which unconventional methods are safe? Asked a tentacled student, without proper testing protocols. Risk calculation. Sarah interrupted. When death is certain without intervention, even a risky treatment with partial success probability becomes viable. Human emergency medicine constantly weighs immediate survival against long-term complications. She displayed a simple diagram showing the human priority system. Circulation, airway, breathing. We call it CAB. Everything else is secondary until these are stabilized. After class, Threxel approached her station. The Vexillion had become a regular attendee despite their initial hostility. I researched your planet's history. They admitted, skin pulsing with the blue pattern indicating intellectual curiosity. Your species developed medicine while constantly at war, with nature, pathogens, and each other. Their voice contained a new note of respect. What we considered barbaric was simply necessary for survival. Sarah smiled. And what I once considered unnecessarily complex in your techniques, I now recognize as elegant precision that human medicine still struggles to achieve. She extended her hand in the human gesture of friendship, and after a moment's hesitation, Threxel extended 3 tentacle-like appendages to complete the gesture. Later that week, Sarah observed an unexpected integration happening across the academy. Students who had mastered her emergency techniques were combining them with their own species' specialized knowledge. A Flotian demonstrated how to repurpose anti-gravity components as emergency tissue supports. A Myrillian group developed crystalline compounds that could temporarily substitute for various biological fluids. Professor Zathrax found Sarah in the laboratory, documenting this unprecedented exchange of medical philosophies. Your presence has sparked something remarkable, the professor noted. Students are questioning assumptions that have guided galactic medicine for centuries. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Perhaps comfort has been the mother of complacency. A provocative observation, Zathrax replied, skin rippling with amusement. Though I would counter that precision and protocol have prevented countless errors. Both approaches have their place, Sarah acknowledged. Ideally, we'd combine the best of both, the adaptability of human emergency medicine with the precision of galactic techniques. The professor's appendages waved in agreement. That is precisely why the exchange program was created. To forge new approaches neither could develop alone. As they spoke, an alert flashed across the Academy communication system. A commercial transport had suffered drive failure in orbit. The message ended with words that sent both the human and the professor rushing toward the emergency center. Multiple casualties. All medical personnel report immediately. The theoretical was about to become devastatingly practical. The Academy's emergency alert system wailed to life, interrupting all activities. A commercial transport carrying diverse species had suffered catastrophic drive failure in orbit. Escape pods scattered across the region, many damaged during the chaotic evacuation. Incoming casualties estimated at 300, announced the emergency coordinator as medical staff assembled. First arrivals in 7 minutes. Professor Zathrax surveyed the organized chaos of the Academy's medical center. We've never handled a mass casualty event of this magnitude, the professor confessed to Sarah. Our protocols assume sufficient time and resources for each patient. Sarah scanned the preparation efforts, immediately noticing the flaw in their approach. Medical staff frantically prepared to treat all arrivals with equal priority, regardless of injury severity. Standard procedure, but disastrous in mass casualty scenarios. "We need to implement triage immediately," she stated, stepping forward with the natural authority of someone who had faced similar situations before. "I need 3 teams, immediate life threats, delayed treatment, and," she hesitated, knowing the concept would disturb them, "expectant cases." The alien medical staff initially resisted, horrified at categorizing patients based on survival probability rather than treating in arrival sequence. The Academy's chief medical officer objected strenuously. "This violates our foundational ethical principle of equal care," he insisted. "With respect," Sarah countered, "equal care for everyone will mean insufficient care for those who need it most. The math is simple. We have more patients than we can treat simultaneously." As the first casualties arrived, burn victims, decompression injuries, and trauma cases from a dozen different species with incompatible biologies, the wisdom of Sarah's approach became undeniable. The sophisticated medical systems, designed for methodical precision, quickly became overwhelmed. "Implement the human's triage system," Professor Zathrax ordered, overriding objections. "Priority 1 cases to Central Treatment, Priority 2 to East Wing, Priority 3 to West Wing." To everyone's surprise, Threxel stepped forward. "I volunteer to lead one of the triage teams," they announced. "I studied the human methods." Soon, the medical center transformed. Students who had attended Sarah's emergency medicine workshops efficiently organized into teams, assessing incoming patients and routing them appropriately. When specialized equipment ran short, they implemented Sarah's improvisation techniques, creating effective substitutes from available materials. The Academy's power grid fluctuated under the strain, threatening life support for critical patients. Sarah and a team quickly established manual backup systems using principles from both human and alien approaches. The precision of alien technology combined with the adaptability of human emergency care. Throughout the crisis, Sarah moved between teams, her combat-honed instincts helping identify which patients needed immediate intervention. She worked alongside alien colleagues who contributed their specialized knowledge of exotic biologies. Together, they achieved what neither could accomplish alone. Treating hundreds of diverse patients under catastrophic conditions with limited resources. In the critical care zone, a Marillion physician attempted to save a severely injured Floetian using conventional techniques. When the specialized equipment failed, she seamlessly switched to methods learned in Sarah's workshop, stabilizing the patient with improvised tools. "I would never have attempted this procedure without proper equipment before," she admitted to Sarah later. "The patient would have died while I waited for replacement systems." 12 hours into the crisis, the situation finally stabilized. The medical teams had treated 287 patients of 24 different species, many with injuries previously considered unsurvivable outside specialized facilities. As Sarah slumped against a wall, exhausted but satisfied, Professor Zathrax approached. The professor's skin displayed the deep blue pattern of profound respect, a color rarely shown to non-Zathraxians. "You've taught us something invaluable today," they said quietly. "Sometimes the perfect procedure is the one that works with what you have." Sarah smiled wearily. That's the most essential lesson of Deathworld medicine. 3 months after the transport disaster, the Academy's Grand Hall hosted representatives from across the galaxy. The emergency response had achieved a 94% survival rate, far exceeding any previous mass casualty response in galactic medical history. Professor Zathrax addressed the assembly, standing alongside Sarah and the student team leaders. "Today marks not just a celebration of lives saved, but the birth of a new medical philosophy." The professor activated a holographic display showing the integration of human emergency techniques with advanced alien procedures. "By combining our different evolutionary approaches, we have created something greater than either tradition alone." The Galactic Medical Council, initially skeptical about including Deathworlders in their programs, formally recognized the value of Earth's medical approaches. The Council Elder, a being so ancient their species was barely recognizable, hovered forward on a gravity platform. "We have long prided ourselves on our advanced technology," admitted the Elder, "but failed to appreciate how environments of scarcity and danger create unique problem-solving capabilities. The human adaptive approach has proven its worth alongside our precision techniques." Sarah, now wearing a formal uniform denoting her new position as permanent Academy faculty, took the podium. Her once alarming appearance now seemed reassuring to the assembled aliens, the physical embodiment of survival against all odds. "Humans often wondered what we could offer a galactic community thousands of years more advanced than Earth," she began. "Now we understand that evolution on different worlds creates different strengths. Our contribution isn't technology, it's perspective." She gestured to the students who had participated in the emergency response. Each species brings unique adaptations shaped by their homeworld. The future of medicine lies not in declaring one approach superior, but in recognizing when each is most valuable. The Academy announced the establishment of a new department, Adaptive Medical Response, combining the precision of alien medicine with the resourcefulness of human emergency care. Sarah would lead this department, with Threxel as her deputy. "The former critic has become my strongest ally," Sarah noted with a smile as Threxel joined her at the podium. "Our complementary approaches have created breakthrough techniques for crisis medicine." Threxel's skin rippled with the gold pattern of ceremonial pride. "The human taught us that flexibility can be as valuable as precision. We taught her that precision need not be sacrificed for speed." The medical protocols developed during the transport disaster were now being implemented across galactic medical facilities, with dual equipment tracks, the traditional precision systems alongside more adaptable emergency alternatives. As the ceremony concluded, Lyra approached Sarah. The Marillion had fully recovered and was now specializing in emergency medicine herself. "Do you think our species evolved the way they did for a reason?" Lyra asked philosophically, her crystalline form catching the light. Sarah considered the question. "I think the universe creates exactly the diversity it needs," she responded. "Some species evolved in safety, developing precision and consistency. Others evolved in danger, developing adaptability and resilience. Both paths created essential perspectives." She smiled as she watched humans and aliens working side by side in the medical labs beyond. "And when those perspectives come together, that's when we truly begin to understand what healing means across the stars." The final display showed the upcoming semester's course catalog, where Deathworlder First Aid had become the most requested elective in Academy history. Below it, a new exchange program was announced. Alien medical students would now study on Earth to experience firsthand the conditions that had shaped human medicine. What had begun with aliens stunned by unconventional methods had evolved into a revolution in galactic medical practice, one that recognized the value of every world's evolutionary gifts, even those forged in the crucible of a death world.